Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for the final installment of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan story. This part of the story starts out with Huatley. She's heartbroken over the death of her cousin Inti. He didn't survive the fall after Vito killed his mount. Her grieving was cut short by the arrival of Vito. He had come to claim her as a sacrifice for the Bat God. He prattled on about the coming age of darkness. Huatley found it tedious. While they traded blows, Huatley reached out with her magic, stretched herself to her absolute limits. It was difficult to concentrate on calling out with her magic and fighting Vito, so she almost collapsed. But the effort paid off when a swarm of dinosaurs charged Vito from both land and air. The flying dinosaurs worked together to keep battering Vito to the ground, and then the other dinosaurs would go into a frenzy. Vito dropped his lance during the onslaught, and Huatley scooped it up and charged Vito, driving the lance through his armor and right into his heart. Vito looked shocked and weakly tried to pull the lance out. "Aclazotz" was all he said before he collapsed, the light fading from his eyes. Huatley thanked the dinosaurs and then sent them to help in other areas of the battle. The story then switches to Malcolm and Quintorius. Quintorius was speaking with the old ghost he had summoned. He went by the name of Abuelo. They summoned Abuelo's wife, Abuela, and then they summoned the remainder of his people, the gardeners. They had special magic they could use to fight the Myco tyrant. Tan Jolam led the gardeners, and he said, "The gods Oger Kaslam and Oger Axonal, along with the other gods, will lend their aid." Amalia offered up her ability to change the landscapes with her maps. The Myco tyrant had just made its way up to the battle, borne up on giant mushrooms. Amalia used her blood magic to mark the tyrant's troops on her map, and then the lead gardener showed her what she wanted done on the map. Amalia caused a huge crevasse to appear, encircling the army, but the mushroom army simply flung itself forwards, mushrooms melding into fungal bridges. By this time, Quintorius had summoned more ghosts, and they slid inside the mushroom warriors, who spasmed and then dissolved into blue smoke. Quintorius explained it to Malcolm. They turn themselves into a disease that only affects fungus. They also had magics that burned through the fungus quite quickly. Still, the waves of fungal warriors pushed forwards. The Myco tyrant and his bearers were too heavy to cross the bridge. It was Breach's time to shine. He had constantly been suggesting Big Boom to Malcolm, but it was never the right time. Now it was. Breaches pulled out his notoriously unreliable weapon, a long metal tube with vine patterns etched in it. Malcolm grabbed Breaches and launched into the air. The Myco tyrant saw them coming. Titans started to throw mushroom men armed with spears directly up in the air at Malcolm. It took everything that he had to dodge them. "Any time now," he said to Breaches. Breaches aimed at the Myco tyrant, but Malcolm was forced to dodge a fungal flyer. So Breaches fumbled his weapon, and when he finally caught it, it was pointing at Malcolm's face. "Watch it with that thing!" Breach's response was, "Fly better!" Breaches took aim again and fired, and they were both thrown back by the force of the fireball that flew forth. The Myco tyrant was obliterated, along with all of its nearby forces. The ghosts took care of the rest in that area, and Malcolm felt his hope surge. But then there was an energy storm, and the sun pushed its way back out of imprisonment just the tiniest bit. People cheered. Victory was coming. But Wada noticed a blood-red glow coming from the temple of Aclazotz. They had to go and stop him. The story then switches to Amalia and Kellen. Kellen was making quick work of the vampires attacking them. His light blades cut through them with ease. Amalia was impressed. Kellen quipped that vampires aren't nearly as scary as geese. Ultimately, Amalia was horrified by what her people had become. How could she explain this to the queen? The Oltec warriors that they traveled with had caught one of Aclazot's servants, a cult member. They call themselves the Cosmium Eaters. The prisoner mocked them. Aclazot will destroy you all. And when they demanded to know where the Bat God was, the prisoner just laughed. He is beyond your reach. Amalia was sickened. She had been lied to and told her God was a kind God. The visions had actually led her to seek a monster instead. Kellen reassured her that she wasn't forced to serve evil, but Amalia said she couldn't defy her God. Kellen told her to just find another god. Maybe Quintorius could help. Amalia asked about Kellen's gods, and he explained that he had none. It was eye-opening. The story then returns to Weta. Aclazotz had left with his followers. They had slipped off somehow. So a feast was arranged in order to celebrate the return of Chimmel's light and to acknowledge the sacrifice of those who lost their lives. This was also a time to build ties between inner and outer Ixalan. A delegation from the Sun Empire, led by Caparocti, arrived to work out an alliance. Aclazotz was a threat to all of Ixalan. Huatli presented Weta a sword that had Inti's ghost kept in a cosmium gem on the pommel. Huatli had gotten word of a possible impending civil war and had to depart to Odapec. The story then switches over to Malcolm. He and Breeches had returned to Sunray Bay. The mine was probably done for. Everyone was gone. When he arrived at Sunray Bay, there were no ships in the docks. The place was deserted and covered in fungus. Sunray Bay had fallen to the Myco-Tyrant. It wasn't dead. We have to get to high and dry before it's too late. They had to find a boat. The story goes back to Amalia. Kellen had taken her to a lush jungle island. His instincts led him there. Deep in the jungle, they found a glowing portal. Kellen smiled. I knew there would be an omen path here. Where does it lead? Amalia asked. I don't know, he said. Are you sure that you want to come with me? Amalia had already sent word home about what had happened, so she nodded. I am. Together, they stepped into the unknown. We then switch over to Quintorius, who's in a place called Colony's End, a giant ruin made of metal. These lands belonged to giants once, and those giants caged Chimmel in metal. Quintorius hunted around, and sure enough, he found traces of the Coin Empire. He mapped out the ruins. Nothing in this place gave any hint about the people who once lived here. That was until he found a room full of glass tanks that were all smashed except for one. In that final tank was a being so large that Quintorius couldn't see its head from where he was standing. It was one of the giants, like the corpse he had seen before, but in much better shape. The giant in the tank was an incredible discovery. He would need to have it moved, but how? His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed the giant wasn't as dead as he thought it was, when it curled its hand into a fist. Quintorius decided it was time to leave. Elsewhere, the Myco-Tyrant had managed to survive. It had already sent spore sacs to the surface and claimed Sunray Bay. It had learned to hide itself. Even now, one of its servants headed towards the pirate haven of High and Dry. He had no outward signs of infection aside from his eyes, which he kept covered with dark lenses. Given enough time, the Myco-Tyrant would claim all of Ixalan. On another ship, Aclazotz plotted. Deep in the ship's hold, stocked with proper sacrifices, the Bat God was headed to Terenzen. And once he claimed that city and the vampire Vona, he would return to destroy Chimmel and rule in darkness. And that ends the story of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what we're doing here, you can support the channel by joining the channel membership or the Patreon. Big thank you to the channel's members and patrons for supporting what we do here. Go enjoy some more lore, my friends, because at the end of the day, remember, lore is life.